The hotel loomed at the edge of the fog-choked cliff, its windows dark like hollow eyes staring at the restless sea. A single light flickered in the lobby, though no one had checked in for decades. The air smelled faintly of old perfume and burnt wood, an unsettling mixture that made every breath feel like a mistake. A low thrum echoed through the floorboards, as if the building itself was whispering secrets no one should hear. Why did the bell in the empty reception ring at midnight? And who, if anyone, had moved the dusty luggage still lined up in neat rows by the elevators? Every shadow seemed to twitch with intent, every creak a warning. A cold gust slid through the cracked doorway, carrying the faintest hint of laughter that wasn't human. Something, or someone, was waiting. The walls themselves seemed to breathe, pulsing with a rhythm no living thing should follow, leaving a trail of questions that clawed at the edge of reality. And just as the fog rolled closer, a mirror reflected a figure that had never entered the hotel, but whose eyes knew you. The grand dining hall smelled of burnt sugar and mildew, the long tables still set with tarnished silverware that hadn't been polished in years. Chairs were scattered as if abandoned mid-meal, and a chandelier above swayed, though the air was still. A faint clinking echoed from the far end, like glasses tapping together. But the room was empty. Who had dined here last? Who left the faint imprint of a hand on the icy tabletop? Shadows stretched unnaturally across the patterned carpet, moving independently of the light. Somewhere above, a door slammed shut, sending a tremor through the floor. The sound was almost alive, carrying a warning or perhaps a challenge. Every instinct screamed to leave, yet curiosity anchored the mind. From the corner of the room, the faint outline of a figure flickered, gone before the eyes could fully focus. Something was not merely haunting the hotel. It was orchestrating a waiting, patient, and deliberate, and it was beginning to notice you. The ballroom doors groaned as they opened on their own, revealing a space frozen in time. A faded mural stretched across the ceiling, depicting a masquerade that had never ended. Music whispered faintly, a scratchy, warped tune that seemed to circle the room, though the gramophone lay shattered on the floor. Footsteps echoed behind, yet when the head turned, the hall was empty. The air was thick and metallic, clinging to the throat with each breath. A sudden draft carried the scent of damp earth, like a grave freshly turned. Candles on the wall flickered as if whispering secrets, their flames bending towards something unseen. And then the faintest laugh, almost tender, almost human, echoed from above. But if someone was up there, why did the ceiling show no stairs? No trace of life? Every glance confirmed only absence, yet the presence of something undeniably alive and distinctly watching lingered. The library smelled of decayed leather and ink, the air heavy with the weight of unread stories. Books lay open on tables, pages fluttering though no breeze moved through the sealed windows. Whispers curled around the spines of old volumes, speaking in a language that teased comprehension just beyond memory. Chairs rocked back and forth, a slow, deliberate rhythm, as if someone was pacing while reading an unseen tome. A pen slid across a desk, leaving a trail of words that vanished moments later, leaving only empty paper. The temperature dropped sharply, frost forming on the edges of the fireplace that had never been lit. In the shadows, shapes shifted, fleeting, almost apologetic, as if hiding from prying eyes, yet desperate to be noticed. Questions clawed at the mind. Who reads here? Who writes? And if no one exists, why is the air so undeniably alive with presence? The basement stank of wet stone and rot, each step echoing like a gunshot in the darkness. Pipes groaned, and water dripped rhythmically, forming puddles that mirrored impossible figures twisting beneath the surface. Boxes were stacked high, filled with remnants of luggage, clothing, and forgotten trinkets that seemed to hum with memory. A door at the far end rattled violently, though no wind entered from above. Was something trapped behind it, or had it already escaped? Eyes, invisible but felt, tracked each hesitant movement. The faint scraping of nails across stone whispered a promise of revelation and danger. Every instinct screamed to flee, but the pull of the unknown was irresistible. A breath of icy air brushed the neck, carrying a whisper. "Welcome. You've been expected." And then silence, thick and suffocating, leaving the basement alive with the sound of unseen watching. The first guests arrived at the hotel just as twilight bled into the horizon. Unaware that the air itself seemed to lean toward them with intent, their laughter echoed briefly through the hallways before fading into an oppressive silence that swallowed every step. Doors creaked, and a cold draft brushed against their skin, making each movement feel observed. One guest paused, sensing something in the mirror that should not have been there. The reflection trembled and warped, showing shadows where none existed, while a whisper curled around the earlobe, teasing a name that was not theirs. Panic gnawed at the edges of their composure, yet fascination rooted them in place. The hotel was awake now, testing its new arrivals, and somewhere deep inside, a low pulse vibrated beneath the floorboards, a rhythm that promised disappearance. Or worse. They explored the corridor toward their rooms, noticing how the walls seemed to stretch subtly with each step, distorting the hallway's geometry. Footsteps echoed even when they stopped, and distant laughter bounced from doors that led nowhere. A small suitcase toppled as if nudged by invisible hands, the contents spilling silently onto the carpet. One guest reached for it, and a faint heat burned through the fingertips, a sensation that made the hairs on the neck rise. Behind a slightly open door, curtains fluttered, though no breeze existed. Something, or someone, was showing them the rules of this place, a prelude to its cruel game. The corridors were alive, every shadow a sentinel, and each turn held the promise of being lost in more than darkness. The elevator ride was supposed to be brief, but the doors closed with a sinister finality, plunging them into darkness. The digital floor numbers flickered, skipping in impossible sequences. One passenger pressed the button repeatedly, but the cabin felt heavier with every passing second, as if gravity itself had a sinister agenda. A cold hand brushed past the arm, though no one stood beside them. Panic clawed at their throats as the metal walls hummed, vibrating with a pulse not of this world. The faint sound of distant footsteps echoed above and below, synchronized with the heartbeat they felt thrumming in their own ears. When the doors finally opened, the hallway beyond looked unfamiliar, stretched and twisted, a place unconnected to the elevator they had just entered. Their room felt familiar yet wrong, as if it had been waiting for them for years. The bed was perfectly made, but the sheets whispered as they moved, brushing against the skin like cold fingers. Windows reflected a nightscape that flickered between reality and a twisted version of itself. On the nightstand, a photograph lay face down, radiating an unseen weight. When flipped, it showed the guests themselves, but smiling in a memory that hadn't happened yet. They froze, the air growing thick with expectancy. From the corner of the ceiling, a shadow shifted, and the faint sound of breathing accompanied it. Someone, or something, was observing, learning, cataloging, and in that quiet terror, the room itself seemed to exhale, claiming them piece by piece. Down in the lobby, the grand clock struck midnight, though its hands hadn't moved in years. Footsteps echoed from the staircase, slow and deliberate. The guests, unaware of the time, felt the weight of invisible eyes tracing their every motion. Faint scratches trailed along the polished floorboards, forming shapes that disappeared as quickly as they were seen. The hotel exhaled, and a door slammed somewhere in the distance, reverberating through the bones. The faint scent of perfume, sweet, rotten, wafted past. The guests' nerves frayed, and yet a compulsion held them in place, drawing them toward the source of the unseen presence. Something ancient and patient waited, and the first vanishings were only moments away. The corridors grew narrower, twisting in ways that defied logic. What had been a straight hallway now curled back on itself, walls pulsating as if alive. One guest stumbled, reaching for the railing that wasn't there, while the other felt the air thicken, pressing against their chest like invisible hands. Doors along the hall creaked open and slammed shut in rhythm with their racing heartbeats. Somewhere above, the faint echo of their own voices called back to them, distorted, mocking. Panic mounted as shadows began to stretch unnaturally across the warped walls, elongating into shapes that whispered secrets no living being should know. One guest turned a corner and vanished. Only a faint gust of cold air remained, carrying the faintest scent of perfume that was not theirs, leaving the survivor trembling and aware that the hotel was no longer merely watching. It was deciding. The survivor ran to the lobby, but the space had transformed. The grand chandelier hung impossibly low, casting moving shadows that seemed to clutch at the furniture. The air smelled of wet earth and decayed flowers, a scent that made the skin crawl. The front desk was gone, replaced by a mirror that reflected only the survivor's terror-stricken face. A whisper curled around their ears, repeating the vanished guest's name. Panic surged, limbs trembling. They tried the doors, locked. Windows refused to show the outside world. Every instinct screamed to flee, but there was nowhere to run. The hotel had absorbed the other guest into itself, leaving a living warning that disappearance was inevitable, and that the walls were patient predators biding their time. The staircase spiraled upward into darkness, each step creaking as if groaning under the weight of invisible eyes. The survivor climbed cautiously, heart hammering, while distant knocking echoed from the ceiling, like fingernails scratching through stone. The air grew colder with every step, frost forming on the railing that had never been there. A door at the top shivered violently, then slowly opened, revealing a room filled with the missing guests' belongings, arranged as though they were still alive, still aware. But the room was empty. The faint scent of perfume lingered stronger here, almost suffocating. The hotel was communicating, marking its territory, and the survivor realized the terrifying truth. The building collected those who entered, preserving pieces of them in an eternal tableau of the vanished. The survivor found the ballroom again, but it was unrecognizable. The faded mural now depicted figures that moved subtly, their painted eyes following every motion. The gramophone played a warped lullaby, though it had no records, no mechanism, only the eerie sound of music from nowhere. Footsteps echoed around the room, circling the survivor. Shapes flickered in the corners, one for every vanished guest, and each whispered a fragment of a warning, a plea, a scream trapped in the folds of the building. Time itself seemed fluid here. Minutes stretched into hours, yet nothing changed except the growing certainty that to linger was to vanish. The hotel's heartbeat synced with the survivors, and the walls seemed to lean closer, hungry. The basement stairs beckoned, dark and dripping, yet irresistibly magnetic. The survivor descended cautiously, each step echoing like a gunshot, splashes of water reflecting fleeting images of the missing guests. Boxes of luggage and clothing now seemed alive, shivering as if breathing. A distant door rattled violently, then fell silent. The hotel exhaled, a cold gust pressing against the back of the neck. Every instinct screamed to stop, yet every fiber of curiosity dragged the survivor forward. A whisper curled around the shoulder. "We were here first, and you'll stay with us." And then a shadow lunged, stretching impossibly, merging with the darkness, and the survivor felt the first tug, the beginning of being pulled into the hotel's hungry interior. The survivor stumbled into a hidden study behind a sliding wall, dust thick on every surface. Old journals lay strewn across a long table, their pages yellowed and brittle, filled with frantic scrawls and diagrams of rooms that didn't exist. The handwriting spoke of disappearances spanning decades, each entry more desperate than the last. A candle flickered to life on its own, illuminating photographs of past guests, frozen mid-step in hallways, staring into the camera with vacant eyes. The room pulsed with a sinister rhythm, as if the hotel itself was eager for recognition. A whisper carried across the room. "We remember them all, and you will too." The survivor's heart pounded, realizing the hotel wasn't just alive. It was a collector of souls, a keeper of memories twisted into eternity, and now they were on the list. A doorway in the study led to a hidden archive, shelves stacked with hundreds of guest registries. Each book opened seemed to hum faintly, echoing the heartbeat of those listed within. Names, dates, and notes chronicled arrivals and their sudden vanishings. The survivor's hand hovered over a registry page. The last entry was today's date, their name already inscribed, as if the hotel had anticipated their presence. A cold wind swirled through the room, riffling pages, whispering fragments of conversations that had never occurred. Panic twisted the stomach, but knowledge had a grip too strong to release. The hotel was a trap, a living diary, and the survivor could almost feel the invisible eyes tracing every nerve, recording fear and fascination alike. The survivor retraced the hallways, but the layout had changed entirely. Rooms twisted into impossible angles, doors led to staircases that descended into black voids. A series of old portraits hung along the walls, eyes painted with such intensity they seemed to follow the survivor's every step. One in particular, a family long vanished, smiled knowingly, lips curling with secrets unspeakable. A whisper repeated over and over, "All paths lead deeper, and there is no leaving." The hallways themselves seemed to pulse in time with the survivor's heartbeat, walls breathing, floorboards tightening with every cautious step. Each corridor was a memory, each door a predator, and the survivor understood that the hotel did not merely contain the vanished, it had consumed them, weaving into its own ever-changing architecture. A small chapel tucked behind the grand ballroom revealed an altar stacked with trinkets, wristwatches, rings, notebooks, and photographs, all relics of the vanished. The survivor's reflection flickered in a cracked, stained glass window, and for a heartbeat, they saw themselves sitting among the relics, eyes vacant. A choir of whispers hummed softly, each voice a fragment of a stolen life, harmonizing with the low rumble of the hotel's pulse. Cold fingers brushed along the spine, not touching but leaving the sense of presence, a reminder that the hotel cataloged fear as carefully as it did belongings. In a single horrifying realization, the survivor knew that every vanished guest had left a piece of themselves behind, forever trapped in the house memory. A mosaic of despair and absence. The hotel revealed its final secret. A grand circular room at the heart of the building, where the vanished were displayed in ghostly frozen tableau, caught mid-step, mid-laugh, mid-scream. The survivor stepped closer, each footfall echoing like a death knell. Faces turned toward them, vacant yet accusing, eyes reflecting terror and hope intertwined. The air thrummed with the collected life force of decades, each pulse tugging at the survivor, promising they too would join the collection if hesitation lingered. The room seemed to stretch into infinity, a perfect trap of perception. And then a voice, cold and patient, whispered, "Every guest belongs." Eventually, reality wavered, the edges of the room folding like paper, and the survivor realized the horrifying truth. The hotel was alive, eternal, hungry, and there's no escape from its memory. The survivor sprinted down a hallway that had never existed before, the floorboards groaning beneath hurried steps. Doors opened and slammed on their own, flinging shadows that seemed to grasp at ankles and wrists. The air was thick, heavy with a metallic tang that made each breath a struggle. Every corner revealed another impossible shift. A wall that had been behind them now loomed ahead, and a staircase twisted upward into darkness. Whispers echoed relentlessly, Fragments of voices from vanished guests, begging, warning, mocking. Panic flared, but the survivor pressed on, heart hammering, instinct screaming that one wrong step would be the final one. Somewhere deep within the walls, the building itself seemed to pulse in response, orchestrating the chase with deliberate malevolence. The survivor reached the ballroom once again, but it had transformed into a mirrored maze. Each reflection multiplied endlessly, showing them running from shapes that didn't exist in reality. A faint music whispered in warped rhythms, echoing footsteps not their own. Their reflection twisted independently, grinning, gesturing toward doors that led nowhere. Panic clawed at their mind, erasing rational thought. Every reflection seemed to contain another version of themselves, another possible fate. As the survivor turned a corner, a shadow lunged from the mirrors, melting into the floor like smoke. The hotel was teaching them its rules. There was no escape, only survival until the walls decided it was time to take another. The staircase to the upper floors now spiraled impossibly into itself, every step stretching as if the building were alive. The survivor climbed, each breath ragged, and the walls seemed to breathe in tandem, tightening the space with each movement. Faint scratches traced the handrail, whispering names of those who had failed before. Above, doors slammed in a rhythm that matched the survivor's racing heartbeat. Each landing revealed glimpses of vanished guests, frozen mid-step, staring with hollow eyes. Fear became tangible, wrapping around limbs like chains. Every instinct screamed to stop, yet the pull of curiosity and survival compelled them onward, deeper into the hungry architecture. The survivor burst into the library, but it was no longer a sanctuary. It had become a labyrinth of floating books and whispering pages. Each tom flitted like a bird, circling the survivor, teasing, blocking paths, rustling secrets that clawed at memory. A pen hovered midair, tracing their name repeatedly in ink that vanished before comprehension. Shadows pooled in corners, growing teeth and eyes that watched with intent. The air felt thick with the weight of hundreds of vanished souls, pressing down, reminding the survivor that the hotel was patient, that the walls would wait as long as it took. Flight seemed impossible, yet the compulsion to move, to resist absorption, drove them deeper into the maze of knowledge and horror. At last, the survivor reached the lobby again, but it had shifted into a cathedral of shadows. The grand clock ticked backward, echoing in the hollow space. Doors opened to impossible stairways, mirrors reflected empty hallways, and the chandelier loomed like a predator. Whispers now roared as if hundreds of voices had merged into one, mocking, warning, claiming. Every exit dissolved into another corridor, looping infinitely. The survivor fell to knees, gasping, realizing the horrifying truth. The hotel did not merely hunt, it ensnared, reshaped, and consumed. Time, space, and reality bent to its will. To flee was to vanish, and to remain was to be catalogued. Somewhere deep within the walls, the pulse of the vanished waited, and now it was time for another. The survivor found themselves in a corridor that seemed to stretch endlessly, the walls pulsing with a heartbeat not their own. Every step echoed back, multiplied into a chorus of fear. Shapes flickered at the edges of vision, faces of vanished guests, their expressions frozen in terror and pleading. The air was thick, almost liquid, pressing against chest and throat, whispering fragments of promises that should never have been made. One door ahead swung open slowly, revealing an empty room that throbbed with unnatural light. The survivor hesitated, aware that stepping inside could be their final mistake, or the only way to understand the hotel's hunger. The walls leaned closer, shadows twitching, as if testing resolve. Fear and curiosity clashed violently, and in that suspended moment, the building seemed almost alive with anticipation, waiting for the inevitable choice. Stepping inside the glowing room, the survivor found a circular chamber filled with floating spectral forms, past guests trapped mid-action, their faces etched with horror and longing. The floor rippled like liquid glass, reflecting impossible reflections of ceiling and walls. Each spectral figure whispered names, stories, pleas, fragments of lives lost to the building's voracious memory. A cold wind swirled around the survivor, carrying the faintest scent of perfume and smoke. Panic surged, but the survivor forced steps forward, drawn to a central pedestal holding a journal light pulsed with an internal light. The journal beckoned, promising knowledge and a glimpse into the hotel's dark soul, but also warning that once read, nothing would be the same. The survivor opened the glowing journal, revealing pages that shifted and changed with every glance. Each entry chronicled vanishings spanning decades, detailing not just names and dates, but final thoughts, fears, and moments frozen mid-step. As the survivor read, the shadows in the room thickened, twisting into clawed hands and mouths that whispered their own fears aloud. The journal pulsed with energy, sensing to the survivor's heartbeat, revealing the hotel's truth. It consumed not only bodies, but memories, emotions, and time itself. The spectral forms reached closer, drawn to the living heartbeat, hungry for the final piece that would complete the hotel's eternal mosaic. Resistance was possible, but only at unimaginable cost. The survivor tried to flee, but the chamber itself reshaped, the walls bending into impossible angles. Every door led to another hallway, each corridor looping back impossibly to the same glowing room. The shadows grew taller, merging into a towering form that pulsed with the rhythm of all the vanished souls. Whispers became screams, surrounding the survivor in a cacophony of accusation, warning, and despair. Panic turned into desperation, and the survivor realized that the hotel did not merely trap guests. It consumed their essence, folding them into its ever-shifting architecture. Every instinct screamed for escape, but every path dissolved beneath their feet, leaving only the hungry presence of the building, patient, eternal, and fully aware. In a final desperate moment, the survivor leaped into the heart of the glowing chamber, hoping to confront the hotel's essence. The spectral forms recoiled, and the towering shadow paused, as if recognizing defiance. The journal hovered mid-air, pages fluttering wildly, revealing glimpses of possible escape. But each came with a cost, a piece of self left behind, a memory forever stolen. The survivor hesitated, knowing that any choice would change them irreversibly. The pulse of the hotel quickened, as if anticipating the moment of decision. One breath, one step, and the building would either claim them completely, or allow a fleeting glimpse of freedom at the cost of sanity. The air trembled with anticipation, and the boundaries of reality itself seemed to waver, awaiting the final move in this predatory game. The chamber shivered, walls bending in impossible angles, echoing the pulse of countless vanished souls. The survivor hovered over the glowing journal, every heartbeat synchronized with the building itself. Shadows writhed like living smoke, forming grotesque shapes that whispered the names of those who had vanished before. The air was thick, tasting of iron and decay, pressing on every nerve. The survivor realized, with a terror that froze the blood, that the hotel's hunger was not merely physical. It consumed will, memory, and identity. One misstep, one hesitation, and they would become another frozen echo in the endless hallways, another reflection in the distorted mirrors, a permanent part of the hotel's living tapestry. The choice was impossibly clear: submit or vanish. The survivor tried to seize the journal, but it darted just beyond reach, pages flicking like wings. The spectral forms surged forward, voices blending into a single roaring pulse that threatened to drown thought itself. Memories of the vanished flashed before their eyes, laughing at dinner, reading in the library, pausing mid-step in hallways. The survivor's reflection flickered in the polished floor, shifting independently, showing a version already claimed by the hotel. Desperation clawed at their mind, and they realized that escape required more than courage. It demanded understanding, the willingness to trade pieces of themselves for fleeting freedom. And even then, the hotel would remember. It always remembered. It always remembered. With trembling hands, the survivor touched the journal, and time seemed to fracture. The chamber expanded infinitely, corridors folding into one another, while the shadows receded slightly, curious, wary, as if acknowledging the act of defiance. The pages revealed fleeting visions of exits, doors into reality, but each came with a cruel price, a memory, a fear, a part of the self, absorbed into the hotel. The survivor made a choice, snatching a fragment of the possible escape and tearing away from the chamber's center. The walls screamed in silent fury, bending and twisting to reclaim what had been taken. The pulse of the hotel intensified, reminding that victory was temporary, survival relative, and freedom always precarious in the presence of such malevolent eternity. The survivor burst through a hallway that had once been familiar, now a twisting labyrinth of light and shadow. Every step carried the weight of lost guests, their whispers riding the currents of air like cold wind. The hotel seemed to stretch endlessly behind, corridors curling back to reclaim the intruder. With every heartbeat, the survivor felt themselves fraying, memories slipping, fear sharpening, identity bending. A single door appeared, faintly glowing, offering escape, but a whisper followed. One step, and a piece of you remains with us. Trembling, the survivor made the final decision, stepping forward into uncertain reality, leaving behind fragments of self to become part of the hotel's eternal mosaic. The walls behind closed silently, patient, waiting for the next guest to wander too close. The survivor emerged into the cold night outside, fog rolling along the cliffs, the hotel looming silently behind, its windows like hollow eyes watching, waiting. Relief surged, but it was incomplete. Fragments of memory, glimpses of vanished souls, and the faint pulse of the hotel lingered in their mind. They were free, yet changed, forever carrying the echo of the building's hunger. From the shadows of the lobby, distant lights flickered briefly, and a soft, almost imperceptible whisper reached their ears. You belong. Until the next time. The hotel remained, eternal and patient, a predator that never slept, ready to claim new guests who dared cross its threshold, leaving only fear and memory in its wake.